Welcome to our church. We love our neighbors.
Welcome.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tarpon Springs, located in the heart of the walkable Tarpon Springs Historic District and known as the home of the Innes paintings. We are a liberal community for all ages, promoting spiritual growth, social justice, and the arts. I'm Reverend Christina Spouty, minister here at UUCTS. I'm glad you are here. I hope that you find meaning in today's service. Please consider joining us beginning on January 10th on Sunday mornings when we will be worshiping as a community together at 10:30 on Zoom. Or drop in for a more personal visit to one of our coffee hours starting at 11:30 on Sunday mornings on Zoom. If you are new to the area or just learning about Unitarian Universalism, we'd love to meet you in one of our newcomer discussions, which are held on the second Sunday of each month at 12:15. Please refer to our website for more information for how to connect with us on Zoom. Our service associate will now begin today's service. Let us enter this sacred time with open minds and open hearts.
Welcome, dear friends. Happy holidays to all. Let us hope the new year brings renewal and health to everyone. Welcome to our spiritual home, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tarpon Springs. My name is Dianna Reif, and I am privileged to be your service associate today. We are a church of many welcomes, and we offer a warm welcome to the guests who are with us. We invite you to check out our website, uutarpon.org, to learn more about who we are and let us know who you are. We hope you will join our coffee hour on Zoom every Sunday at 11 a.m. Our website has the Zoom sign-in information. We are privileged to have as our guest speaker, Reverend Bob Murphy, Minister Emeritus of our church. Since retiring a year ago, Reverend Bob has stayed very active as a retired UU minister with involvement in numerous UU and community activities. He is as involved in helping as he was before he retired. We are grateful that he is willing to share his time with us today. Here find a house of welcoming. Here find vision and hope. Here be received as you truly are. Unique and beautiful, your journey acknowledged, your love honored. Let us rejoice together. And now, as is our tradition, let us light the chalice while our wonderful music director, Bonnie Whitehurst, plays for us. In the words of Melanie Davis, a spark of hope. If ever there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice.
Remembered burns a beacon bright and clear.
good to be with all of you again in this holiday season. I wish we could be together in person, but that's the reality that we have with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I hope to see all of you in person in the new year. There are many good holidays in December. We've just celebrated Christmas, and of course, many of us have celebrated Hanukkah, the day of the winter solstice, Kwanzaa, and there are other holidays that come to mind. But one of the best holidays that I've ever experienced is called Watch Night. Watch Night. And it's at the very end of December, what some of you would call New Year's Eve, the last night of December. Watch Night is celebrated in different ways by different religious groups, but I want to talk especially about how it's celebrated in African American churches, including some of the African American churches in Tarpon Springs. The story goes like this. Back in 1862, during the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But the proclamation to free the slaves in the South did not go into effect immediately. It was scheduled to go into effect on January 1st, 1863. So on New Year's Eve, Black people and white people gathered in African American churches for something called African American, or what we would call African American Watch Night. They gathered about 7 or 8 o'clock, many of them, and they waited for midnight. And as they waited, they had Bible readings, they sang songs, and there were some very lively discussions. Some people thought that as soon as the clock hit midnight, well, liberation would arrive. Everybody would be free and everybody would be equal, and well, what else did you need? Others were much more cautious. They knew that war still had a long way to go, and the struggle for liberation might last for generations, maybe even for a century. So people talked about that sort of thing. Everybody had different opinions, and everybody waited for the midnight hour. And then finally it arrived. It was a moment of jubilation. And there were other celebrations on New Year's Day. In South Carolina, the Union Army had already taken possession of some areas on the coast, and Thomas Higginson, who was a very famous Unitarian minister, talked about what happened in Beaufort, South Carolina. Unitarians and Quakers were working with the former slaves, refugees who'd run away from the plantation, and there was a big celebration. Reverend Higginson talked about having barbecue. That was probably the first time he'd ever had real Southern barbecue, and he was very impressed by that. He talked about the way that people came together, and they didn't have a church, but they had a large oak tree. They all gathered under the oak tree, and somebody started to sing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty." And all the voices came together, and Reverend Higginson was simply amazed to hear that wonderful choir. They knew just how much this moment, Watch Night, meant to all the people, Black and white, who were assembled at what had previously been a plantation. The tradition continues in many churches. As I've mentioned, it continues in churches in Tarpon Springs. I've been to Watch Night celebrations. This year especially, we wait for a time of liberation. We know there'll be changes in politics and in the culture. People are worried about the pandemic, concerned about police violence, all kinds of things. But we still look forward to the hour of liberation. And it may be very close or it may be very far away, but it's something that means a lot to all of us. Namaste.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither paid when we bring him hither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament, and the bitter weather. Sire, the night grows darker now, and the wind grows stronger. Fears my heart, I know not how I can go much longer. Mark my footsteps, my good page, tread thou in them boldly. Thou wilt fan the winter's rage, chills thy bloodless coldly. So in his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christian men, be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now shall bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing.
I have a reading which I like to share just after Christmas. This is by Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a very famous theologian during the 20th century. He was one of Martin Luther King's teachers, and he provided a great deal of inspiration for the civil rights movement. Reverend Thurman said, "When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and the princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, that's when the work of Christmas really begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, and to bring peace among the brothers and the sisters, and to make music in the heart." That's the message, not for Christmas, but for the days that follow Christmas, all through the year. Namaste.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Stay in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blowing away, rising the sea. Move in my giving life the shape of justice. Roots will be course, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. band outside the seaman's mission. Memory fading with the metal ribbons that you wears. In our winter city, the rain cries a little pity for one more forgotten hero in a world that doesn't care. So how can you tell me you're lonely and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something that'll make you change your mind.
It's time for the offering for the work and the welfare of this church. Please go to our website, uutarpon.org, and click on the donate button. Or please send your checks to 57 Reed Street. The entire address is right there on your screen. And thank you.
I have a story that I want to share with you. And it's a story about winter and what it's like to depend on the kindness of other people in a very difficult situation. I have a picture that I'm going to share with all of you. And we'll see if I can hold it up here. Now, this is a picture of Roger Williams. He's the man in the black hat. He was a very famous minister back in the 1600s. And you can see that he's with a group of American Indians, Native Americans. Roger Williams. He's one of my favorite Baptists. Now, the story goes like this. In the winter of 1636, Reverend Williams was in Massachusetts, and he was under a lot of pressure from the political authorities and the religious authorities to change his ways. He was preaching a lot of dangerous thoughts. He thought that the colonists ought to pay the Indians for the land that they had taken. And he believed that there should be a strict separation of church and state powers, that everybody should have the freedom of religion. There should be no established church. And he also believed in the equality of men and women, which was a very radical idea back in the 1600s. He was threatened with arrest and deportation back to England, but he ran away in the midst of a blizzard. He traveled over 50 miles in the storm, and he suffered some very severe injuries because of frostbite, and he never really did recover from some of those injuries. But at a critical moment in his journey, as the picture shows, he was rescued by Native Americans, and they provided him with shelter and food and some of the other necessities. Now, the point of the story is, and it is a bit of a Good Samaritan story, is that these people were very different races, different religions, different languages, different ways of looking at the world, and yet somehow they learned how to depend on each other. Roger Williams was saved by the Indians, and he said later he was saved by the power of love. They had no reason to take him in, to care for him. They'd had some bad experiences with other Europeans, but for some reason, they came to his rescue. He stayed grateful for that experience for the rest of his life. The Indians and the colonists found ways to work with each other, at least in Rhode Island. Roger Williams didn't join the Indians, and most of the Indians did not convert to Christianity, but they still found ways to love each other, to care for each other, to help each other during difficult times. That story is still important, I think, because it says something about this mutual aid theme that we'll be discussing today. Let me tell you another story. When I was growing up as a kid, the message in America was very simple. We believed that we were privileged people, protected people. We talked about human rights abuses in other countries, but we thought that somehow as Americans, we were above and beyond that kind of stuff. Other people suffered, but we felt there was something exceptional about being an American. Preachers repeated the same story, and I include Unitarian Universalist ministers during the 60s. Many believed that, well, we were the protected people, the special people, the privileged people. Other folks had to worry about human rights, and we were sympathetic. But we thought for some reason we were going to get by. We were going to continue to prosper. The year 2020 was the year when, well, many of those attitudes were shattered. Some of the old dreams came to an end. We suddenly realized, because of the pandemic and other experiences, that like Roger Williams, we were indeed very fragile, very vulnerable. We too could suffer. We too could be lost, and we too had to depend on the kindness of others. The mutual aid theme has become very important in recent months. Mutual aid isn't charity, and it's not government work, although it can sometimes involve charity and government work. But essentially, mutual aid is the giving and receiving, well, of necessities between people who've grown close to each other and who rely on each other voluntarily. Now, some of you like definitions, so I'm going to see if I can provide you with a definition of mutual aid that may be helpful. Mutual aid is a voluntary and reciprocal exchange of resources for mutual benefit. In mutual aid projects, people take responsibility for caring for one another. It can indeed involve some charity work, and government can be helpful sometimes. In particular, we can think about the work of the Cooperative Extension Service. But by and large, you're on your own in mutual aid. You learn to help each other as volunteers. And for this reason, mutual aid has supporters on the political left and on the political right. It's become important to a great variety of people for a variety of reasons. The roots of mutual aid work are really in many religious traditions. So we can talk about Jewish tradition. We can talk about the kibbutz movement, for example, would be a modern example of mutual aid, although we could go as far back as the Exodus experience, when the Hebrew children were in the wilderness and learning how to survive. In Christian tradition, we could talk about the Catholic workers and Dorothy Day, and we could also talk about the Pennsylvania Dutch, people like the Mennonites and the Amish. We could probably talk about some of the Quakers and some of the Mormon groups and others. For the Muslims, there's a long tradition of mutual aid, which goes back to the Prophet Muhammad. And of course, when we talk about the Native Americans, we realize that most of the tribal economies have traditionally depended upon mutual aid arrangements. And that's still true for the Seminoles and for many others. Families learn how to rely upon each other, particularly during difficult times. For Unitarians and Universalists, we can go back to, certainly back to the 1800s. We had a number of very famous experiments with mutual aid, communes, and that kind of thing. Louisa May Alcott, when she was a child, lived on a commune of sorts called Fruitlands, which was in a small town in Massachusetts. Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author, lived at Brook Farm, which is in the outskirts of Boston. Hopedale was a very famous experiment in central Massachusetts, which was managed for a while by Unitarians. And there are other examples in our history as well. For the 20th century, the great spokesperson for mutual aid was none other than James Luther Adams. And we think about Marty Cardinal, who donated those 5 stones that are outside of the church with words of wisdom from James Luther Adams, reminding us, as Marty often did, that we really have to depend upon each other. We have to be kind to each other and find ways to be reconciled. So the Unitarian Universalists also have a mutual aid tradition, but we're not alone and we're hardly unique. Some of you may be curious about what mutual aid would look like in the here and now. And there are many examples, some of them old and some of them new. Old examples would include, well, I'm going to reach for a page here, community gardening. Certainly in Tarpon Springs, that's been a mutual aid arrangement that depends very much on how neighbors can help each other. And it includes food distribution through pantries and other arrangements. Habitat for Humanity provides housing. And this is a case where people give as well as receive. Habitat doesn't simply give you a house. You're expected to help with construction as best you can. And volunteers help with feeding carpenters and providing transportation, and everybody lends a hand as best they can. Homeschooling and healthcare. Both of these have new possibilities because of the Zoom technology. We've learned how to use this very quickly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, our church is now meeting online and relying very heavily on video technology. This extends into homeschooling. Many kids can't go to school, and there are ways that they can receive an education while they're at home. There are also some experiments with home health care, telemedicine, parish nursing, pastoral care in different ways. All of these things are now being done electronically. And I suspect and hope that this tradition, this new tradition, is going to continue even when the pandemic is over. There'll still be a need for emergency assistance and just a need to check in with each other every now and then. Not because we have to, but because we're members of congregation in covenant with each other, and we really do want to care for each other. We want to provide assistance when it's needed, giving and receiving assistance as it's possible. Time banking is something which is new to me, but Reverend Christina has been involved with it for quite a while. We have a proposal for a national Unitarian Universalist program, which may take place in June at the General Assembly, to explain time banking and other forms of mutual aid. Time banking is an arrangement where people contribute their services. Maybe it's child care or home repair or baking bread or something that you can contribute to the community. You can receive credit for what you've done. And then when you need services, maybe mowing the lawn or washing the automobile or fixing a broken window, there may be people who can come to your assistance. It does take some organization and some record keeping. And I hope Reverend Christina can explain how all this works. But it has some good experiences with time keeping and time banking up north. And maybe we can put that to work here in Pinellas County as well. There's much more that can be said about mutual aid, and I think the conversation will develop in the new year as we think about what it is we want to do in our congregations, how we can assist each other in clusters, and where it is we want to go in organized religion in the future. I'm going to close with some comments about one of the most famous of the mutual aid advocates. There have been many, Mohandas Gandhi, Leo Tolstoy, and others, but I think you may recognize this picture, this gentleman. That's Jesus of Nazareth, the way he probably really looked. I don't know who this guy is. This is maybe the way some people think that Jesus should have looked. Lighter hair, white skin. But this is the way Jesus probably looked. And archaeologists and forensic scientists and others have worked with each other in recent years to come up with this composite picture. The real Jesus was probably a migrant worker, a peasant who traveled around the country as a teacher, healer, community organizer, someone who frequently talked about mutual aid, talked about the ways in which people could care for each other. And he felt that that was something that was needed in the ancient world. And I would say it's still needed in today's world very much. Jesus was asked on one occasion, what do we do in order to be saved? And you can phrase the question in other ways. You can talk about happiness or enlightenment or liberation. But for Jesus, the question was, what do we do in order to be saved? He said there's two things that are really important. You have to love God. You can define God as you like. He said you also have to love your neighbor as you love yourself, essentially giving and receiving, not because you have to, not because government tells you this is something you must do. We're saved by love, said Roger Williams. I think Jesus understood the message. It's been understood in many places, and it's something that we celebrate in this season and as we celebrate in the new year. Namaste.
O young and fearless prophet of ancient Galilee, your life is still a summons to serve humanity, to make our thoughts and actions less prone to please the crowd, to stand with humble courage for truth with hearts unbowed. Create in us the splendor that dawns when hearts are kind, that knows no race nor station as boundaries of the mind, that learns to value beauty in heart or mind or soul, and longs to see God's children as sacred, perfect, whole. Stir up in us a protest against unheeded wealth, for some go starved and hungry who plead for work and health. One more, give us your challenge above our noisy day, and come to lead us forward along your holy way.
It's one of the best readings I can find for the Unitarian Universalists. It's by Bill Schultz, who was our national president for a few years. Reverend Schultz said, "This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all, once again, that we must hold the whole world in our hands." Happy New Year. Namaste.
Go now in peace, go
hope that you found meaning in today's service. Again, I invite you to consider joining us sometime on Sunday morning when we gather for worship as a community. The service starts at 10:30 a.m. on Zoom. You are also welcome to drop into our Zoom room coffee hour any Sunday at 11:30 for friendly conversation. If you are new to the area or just learning about Unitarian Universalism, we'd love to meet you in one of our newcomer discussions, which are held on the second Sunday of each month at 12:15. Please refer to our website for more information on how to connect with us on Zoom. If you use the Connect Online button, it will take you directly to any of our activities. We look forward to meeting you.